Amen. So, a few points. One, as you've noticed, there's no kids' church today, so we wanted the kids to participate in all of the aspects of baptism. I'm looking for Jacob. Are there, drawing things for them? So if your kids need something to occupy for a few moments, actually ask Pastor Jacob just to go to the back, and there's some coloring sheets and other things. And then you'll also probably get some bubbles, which Jacob's going to talk about later, which are part of our baptism celebration. So, welcome to everyone. If this is your first Sunday here, then we welcome you and we invite you to go to our welcome table following the service, and they'll be able to give you all of the information about West Springs Church. If only you had been here is the lament of all those with hearts broken and hope fading. With those whose belief is lacking and lagging in the reality that this time it seems that God has failed us. These are the words that Sisters Mary and Martha offer to Jesus as he arrives far too late to make a difference for their brother who has died. What they had observed Jesus do for others, the lame made to walk, the blind called to sight, the outcast given space, and those who imagine themselves far from God, reminded that God is near, he has failed to do for them. And so rightfully so, they announce, if only you had been here, if only you had cared to show up on time. And Jesus' response to their accusation is twofold. First, he tells them who he is, and second, he grieves all that continues to await the transformation that is to come. I am the resurrection and the life. This statement means more than what they could imagine, for now they might think about life after death, but what they can easily miss is that Jesus is also concerned with life in the moment. And as he sees the sisters weep, takes in the view of the tomb and the grief of the moment, the text indicates that Jesus felt great discontent. Discontent that his friend had died, yes, but also discontent with all that is not yet as it should be. All that is not yet as he designed it to be from creation. Friends weeping, death reigning, a world marred, distorted, and undone by all that their tears represented. And in this moment, the God who is the resurrection and the life, the one who walks among them, donning human flesh, is about to reveal a fraction of his dream for humanity, his vision for a world made right, for all things to be as intended from creation. As he asks them to roll the stone away, the crowds are gasping, hearts are pounding, minds are curious about what it is that Jesus is all about. And then the unexpected happens as Jesus calls a dead man to life. 3 words spoken, Lazarus, come forth. And without a breath held or a pause in the atmosphere, Lazarus emerges alive. 4 days dead, now fully alive. And in that moment, with tears in his eyes, Jesus knows our great loss. Jesus understands our great fear as death accosts humanity, holding us ransom as loss and pain weaves its way throughout our story. As Jesus calls the dead to life, it is a pronouncement that all is not as it should be, but I have come to make all things right. I am the resurrection. I am the life. And I wonder if these words resonated in the ears of those who stood many days later at the foot of the cross. Jesus now overcome by death. Jesus now destined for the tomb. It might appear that every teaching spoke and every hope sparked and every life changed by the name and presence of Jesus has become nothing as Rome wins and the powers delight in the death of the Messiah. And so we are not surprised to read that the disciples scatter. the followers hide. Mary, the mother of Jesus, carried off by John, as a few follow the body of Jesus to the tomb. How they must wonder, did the man who undid the power and finality of death for Lazarus now find themselves enrobed by a tomb, overpowered by the very death that he had undone, and now seems powerless? And for a moment, Lazarus' story does seem to lose its weight and its power. For it seems that the teachings of Jesus have become a farce. The expectant outcome has left them surrounded by an unexpected end. Death has arrived, death has won, mourning has begun, and the tomb is sealed. Jesus is dead. Hope is replaced with fear and disappointment. The words, "I am the resurrection and the life," become a distant memory that is until Sunday morning arrives. And we follow the women to the tomb, Mary Magdalene leading the way, only to discover that the stone is rolled away. The body is missing. Jesus is gone. As some rush in to inspect the tomb and others rush to go and tell the disciples, Mary finds her way into the garden, her eyes blurred with tears as she walks up to the gardener, who is a stranger, and until he says her name, Mary. Could it be? Is it true? This is the voice of Jesus. Her heart awakens, her hope revives. She runs to announce, "He is risen. I have seen the Lord." And suddenly the words spoken at Lazarus' tomb begin to return with force. "I am the resurrection and the life." What Jesus had declared beside the grave of his friend was never only about Lazarus. Lazarus was the sign. Jesus is the fulfillment. At the tomb of Lazarus, Jesus stood face to face with everything that left him discontented, with everything that left him with grief that hollowed out his heart, sickness that ravaged his body, death that seemed to seal the story, and a world so far from the dream of God that tears were the only faithful response. But his weeping was never about weakness. It was the holy ache of God in the face of all that had gone wrong, all that was not as it should be. And when Jesus called Lazarus forth, he was doing more than raising a friend from the dead. He was giving the world a glimpse, a sign, a foretaste, a declaration that death's power was not ultimate. But Lazarus' resurrection was still only a sign. Lazarus would one day die again. What happened in Bethany was a breaking in, a window opening into what God intended to do for all of creation, from the beginning to the very end. Because what Jesus began at Lazarus' tomb, he completes in his own. At Lazarus' grave, Jesus confronts death, and at his own grave, Jesus defeats it. This is why his discontent matters. The tears of Lazarus' tomb are answered in the triumph of Easter morning. Everything that made Jesus weep, the sorrow of Mary and Martha, the pain of bodies breaking, the violence of empire, the blindness of power, the fear of the disciples, the finality of the grave, all of it is taken up into the resurrection. His rising is not merely proof that he lives, it is God's answer to everything that is not as it should be. Death has not simply been delayed, it has been undone. The stone rolled away is more than an empty tomb. It is the breaking open of every sealed place in our lives. Every place where grief told us this is the end. Every place where fear told us to stay hidden. Every place where death told us, I have won. And into those places, resurrection speaks with the same voice that called Lazarus to life and called Mary by name, and now speaks to us with a rousing yet whispered announcement. The dead are called to life. The grieving are called to hope. The hidden are called out of fear. The broken are called towards wholeness. And what began as Jesus' discontent at the tomb of Lazarus becomes in the resurrection God's great declaration. Death does not get the final word. Not for Lazarus, not for Jesus, not for us. Because Easter is the moment when what Jesus longed for, what he wept for, what he moved toward the cross and the tomb begins to break open into the world. A new creation, a restored Eden, a world where all that is not as it should be will be made right. For Christ is risen, Christ is alive. And yet, if we are honest, we know that even after that first Easter morning, the world does not suddenly become whole. Death is defeated, and yet we still grieve. Hope has risen, and still we know heartbreak. New creation has begun, and still the world bears the scars of that which remains. This is the tension of the resurrection. Yes, sin has been confronted. Death has been dethroned. The powers have been unmasked. The grave has been emptied, but the stone rolled away. The tomb empty is not only a proclamation of what God has done, it is also an invitation into what God is doing. Because resurrection was never meant to simply be admired from a distance. It is meant to be embodied. Those who have encountered Jesus, those who have said with clarity, I have decided to follow the way and message and person of Jesus, we know what it is to die and to rise again. To die to the idea that sin has the last word in us or in our world. To die to the lie that what we fear is what will win and what will control us. To die to the belief that shame speaks louder than our belovedness. To die to the labels that others have put on us that speak opposition to who God is and what God says about us. To die to the idea that control and violence and the pursuit of power are equated with godliness. To die to the need to satisfy those beside us rather than to live as ones who know that we are the apple of God's eye. We know what it is to embody the resurrection, for we know what it is to die to all that which told us the lie that death has won, that darkness has the final say, that sin controls us, that love cannot find us, that we must do everything to save ourselves. And instead, we find ourselves made more alive as we both participate in and become a new creation. For those of us who know what it is to die, we know what it is to hear Christ call us to life. We know what it is to embody the resurrection. We know that it is not enough for me and mine to be brought to life, but we must become a people who are defined by the work of the resurrection. We must become a people who speak life in places marked by death, who create belonging where there has always been exclusion, to work for justice where there has been oppression, to carry hope into places that have forgotten how to imagine it, to co-create with God the world Jesus revealed and proclaimed, a world where heaven comes to life here on earth. And today, specifically for those being baptized, this is the invitation. Today, you are not simply announcing that one day you hope to go to heaven. Today, you are declaring that your life now belongs to the risen Christ who is bringing heaven to earth. In baptism, you join your story to his death and to his resurrection. You go under the waters as a sign that death does not own you. You rise from the waters as a living witness that physical death and spiritual death do not have the final say. Your life becomes a testimony that even in the darkest places, God is still able to call forth life. Today, you become a sign of the resurrection, that it is not simply that which we remember, nor is it only that which we await. Rather, it is something that we live. And so if you arrive today with the reality that all is not as it should be and hope is fading, remember that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. If you have sensed that your world and your future and even your present seem sealed by stones and weights far too heavy to move, remember that Jesus calls even you back to life. When fear and grief remind you that all is not okay, that all is not as God intended, remember that as Mary announced he is risen, she also announced that all is not well, but all will be made whole because I am the resurrection and the life has come to life. So today, whether you come with hearts heavy, with hope dimmed, or shame accusing, hear the call of the risen Christ. You too are invited to rise. You too are called to life, to become ones who embody the resurrection. For those who are baptized today or yesterday or in years past, may your life be a living witness that death does not have the final word, that resurrection is not only remembered but embodied. Carry the story of the risen Christ into places where life seems untenable, where hope is fading, where shame is rising, where fear is the only voice that is heard. And there, in the very places where it seems impossible to be true, announce and live and embody the words of Mary as she encounters the Christ and says, "He is risen. I have seen the Lord." Be the sign, be the voice, be the presence of the resurrection as you announce, He is risen. He is risen. Amen. Oh, it's baptism time. So,